Awesome. I love it. Well, thank you so much for talking with us today. I'm actually super excited. Just to give a little bit of background, and then Olivia, I'm gonna let you introduce yourself. Olivia and I did a course together, and during a particularly difficult time in her life, it seemed, I won't speak for you, but it definitely seemed like you were tackling some heavy stuff. But the cool thing was that you handled it so gracefully and so honestly. I mean, you were so open and genuine about things that, it was a tough course. I don't know about your take for it, but I struggled a lot with some of the interactions in that course. And yet you still came every single time very honest and open and genuine. And that took a lot of courage because, it really, really did.
Oh,
And
thank you.
you're welcome. And it was beautiful. It was nice to see someone weather such a heavy storm with such grace and just kind of be like, yep, this is what I'm going through. Here's how I'm handling it. And the more I've gotten to know you and know about you, the more I see you take that approach regularly. Yeah, I've seen you talk about how hard it was to come out of the military and some of the mental challenges, some of the mental health challenges. Um, but I always see you talk about such really intense topics with so much equanimity and um, just honesty and standing in your truth. So if you wouldn't mind giving us a little bit of background about yourself and what brought you to this place of being so comfortable in your space.
So my name is Olivia Nunn, and I'm a retired lieutenant colonel from the United States Army. I did 20 years, and my story is that I did meet my then spouse at the beginning of my career, and we used to say jokingly that we were issued to each other. And we did build a life together. We were together for 20 years. We were married for 16, but together for 20. And we had two children together. Our oldest child is now 10 years old, and our youngest is now 7, and we co-parent. And I think the beauty of that is that we do co-parent, we get along. And I think for those that have ever gone through a divorce, that's what you want. I don't know if we'll ever be, best friends again, but at least we can co-parent and we are friends. And I think that is a good place to be. And for me, I rose to success. I reached the rank of lieutenant colonel, which is a pretty high rank in the military, and I did relatively well. And I loved what I did for the United States Army. I did 3 tours to Iraq. I led an organization that a woman had never done before. And I achieved some milestones within my career. And I was, I think always trying to achieve the next thing, the next thing. And, at one point I thought that I wanted to be a general officer, but I think I quickly realized that wasn't in the cards for me. And that's not what I wanted to do. With all that being said, you know, I I knew when it was time for me to exit the Army. So I did my 20 years. What I didn't anticipate was that when it was time for me to leave the Army, that what I thought at that time was my life seemingly felt like it was completely over.
Mhm.
As I was retiring from the Army, or another way to view it is divorcing from the Army, I was actually going through an actual divorce. My world just seemingly came to a screeching halt. The person that I was in love with, who was my partner, my spouse, everything that I had built a life with and a career with, our love story was ending. And it was so unexpected. And I'd say that was probably unexpected for both of us because it literally was overnight. It was, hey, we're done. And there was no signs. It wasn't like we were unhappy or that, we're fighting and you could see the writing on the wall. I think now when I look back, I think I realized that there were probably a death by a thousand paper cuts, right? And you realize that, there were issues, but we just didn't know. And we could have done better, better communication, better ways in which we could have healed each other, better ways we could have gone therapy. But I think we just didn't know. We thought that we were happy. We thought that we were doing the right things. And I'm not blaming and I'm not pointing fingers. I'm just saying these are the things that now you realize, right? And with that, everything that I knew, everything that I was hoping, everything that I was dreaming just grinded to a halt. And all I could think about, all I could understand was that my world had shattered. And I just started to turn inward.
Yeah.
I just started doing a lot of analyzation of myself, my world, my understanding. And here's the thing that I talk about. The army made me a very lethal planner. I was already very detail oriented. That's, who I am as a person, my personality, my culture as a first generation Korean American. And then the army really honed in on that in my personality. And I just really turned inward and I started analyzing what was wrong with me. What was wrong with me that I was failing? I felt miserable, a failure, a loser, unlovable, unworthy, that I couldn't even keep my life together, that the person that I loved no longer loved me.
Yeah.
And so, and this is the part that the army teaches you: find the enemy, fix the enemy, destroy the enemy. Or in other words, to look at the problem is find the problem, fix the problem, destroy the problem. And in my darkness, in my brokenness, I was viewing myself as the problem. And so in that dark process, in that dark concept of thinking, when you're so lost and so broken, I wanted to remove myself. And I came very close to removing myself from this world.
I think that that's something that anyone who's gone through it, it's funny because even though our situations are so different, when I went through my accident, I had a very similar, brought to just the bare bones of who I was and not seeing a way forward and being terrified that, like I lost some of my closest friends. I lost sight of who I was. I, for a while there, thought that my only existence going forward was alone and broken. And I came to a similar conclusion of like, if this is what life is, I don't want to have anything to do with it because this hurts too much. And I, it's interesting because I did the same, it sounds like similar introspection of what is wrong with me, what is broken in me. And I don't know about you. I'm curious because for me, it ended up being a catalyst. It burned away all the stuff that was not serving me. And it gave me an opportunity to kind of rise new with a much stronger sense of who I was and a much clearer sense of purpose, honestly. It helped me crystallize the me that I am, and it helped me stand more comfortably in my own truth and own, the damage and the past and all that, but also own the fact that like the only person who can create tomorrow is me. The only person who can look at where I am now and where I want to go forward and shift that trajectory is me. And it seemed like, just from the outside watching you go through the process, it seemed like it did something very similar for you as well.
I mean, it's a journey and it still is a journey.
Yes.
And it took a while. I had to go to therapy. Um, in the military, in our culture, asking for help is problematic, right? We're very type A, aggressive, alpha type personalities, and asking for help seems, contrary to that and seems weak.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to ask for help. And I think part of that is the shame,
Yes.
right? The
Yeah.
shame, it's the I don't want to be a burden. And it's also you don't want people to know that you have problems. Just a plethora of things. It's also admitting that you have a problem too.
Yeah.
And when I finally did ask for help, I had a I had a hard time finding resources to
Yes. Yes.
and which is part of the backside that I'll talk about of my advocacy. And when I, finally found help and started my healing journey, I had to come to grips with a lot of trauma that was in my life, not just the marriage, but a lot of events that took place in my military career. I was assaulted as a lieutenant during my deployment by my own soldier. Um, and I brushed that under the carpet. I didn't talk about it for a long time. And your mind does a lot of things to protect itself, right? I
Yes.
actually forgot about it, um, because the military did nothing about it. And I think part of it, did the whole, well, it's okay because I wasn't sexually assaulted. I was only physically assaulted. Therefore, it's not worthy.
Yeah.
And I'm not worthy of talking about that because since I survived, it could have been worse than whatever. And I had survived a few, an IED blast, an ambush, couple rocket attacks that I just like, you know what? These things are so small in hindsight compared to losing my friends who have, kicked down doors, who have been blown up, that therefore my incidences are so minuscule. So therefore, I'm not worthy of having these conversations. I'm not going to talk about it. And I think the other part was it's the whole, well, women aren't supposed to be there. They're not on the front lines. What do you know, Olivia? You weren't really there. And there's a lot of awards that are given. There's a lot of badges that are represented in what you did or didn't do. And, I didn't always have the greatest leaders that put me in for a lot of those badges or awards. And I think a lot of it is I also didn't talk about it. I also didn't say like this event happened or that event happened because it goes back to I wasn't supposed to be there. So there aren't certain badges that I carry that signify that I was in certain events or combat situations because again, I wasn't there. And so I think it's that stigma of a woman in a place where she's not supposed to be, and the invisible soldier, the invisible wounds, the invisible trauma. And I just kind of brushed it off because all you want to do and all you want to be is part of the team to be accepted for your ability and capability to lead well and honorably. And so you go through that healing journey and you realize that you have a lot to unpack, a lot to heal through. And you do find yourself. And this is something that I've said before to other people and in other podcasts is that you have to find the version of yourself that you lost. And oftentimes I would reference something that you can visualize. And what I would visualize or help you visualize is find the little girl or the little boy that you once knew, the innocent version of yourself that you were unafraid to be, where someone else's opinion of you didn't matter and you were willing to be free.
Yeah.
And that is the person you should find and be. And you should unabashedly chase that version of you.
I love that. Like that, and that is, it's so beautiful because we, I think everybody experiences this. We all have these expectations put on us by society, whatever society we grow up in, we have these expectations placed on us. And it takes, yeah, I keep reading these statistics about how kindergartners, when they test kindergartners, they all score brilliantly in some category. Like all kindergartners have genius level talent in some category. But by third or fourth grade, when they test those exact same kids, they all start to become mediocre and score roughly about the same. And there's some outliers, but for the most part, they all start to score the same. And what happens is the longer they're in our society, the less they continue to function at their genius level at whatever they're amazing at. And so going back and reconnecting with that inner child, and like, one of the things that it sounds so corny, but it's so true, is I've learned how to talk to my inner child And when I'm really struggling with something, give her the voice that I wish someone had said to me, you know, that I love her, that she's worthy, that she's amazing, that she's doing so well and she's done really tough things, but she's going to do this because she is so strong and so capable. And it is weird because it really does work. You know, when I first read about it in an article, I was like, this is so corny. This is dumb. And I was like, I'm gonna try it because you know the experts say to do this, but it is amazingly helpful and rewarding to speak to that part of yourself that's been left alone for so long. So I love that tip. That's awesome.
Yeah. And and I think the other part is there's so much expectation of who you should be, what you should be, what you shouldn't be, what you should look like, what you shouldn't look like.
Yes.
And it's hard, right? It's an everyday process. And on top of that, it's not only is it trying to find yourself, trying to heal through all that trauma, and then all of that was also, what do I want to be when I grow up? Because here it was, I had just left a career of 20 years in the United States Army. And if you think about it, for me, I grew up, did high school, graduated high school, went to college, did 5 years in college, and as soon as I graduated college, I commissioned the United States Army. So I spent my whole entire young adult years in the Army. I commissioned in 2001. And shortly after I commissioned, 9/11 happened. So I watched the towers come down after I had already commissioned. So I was already in the Army. I was already in my officer basic school, and I watched the towers come down. So what I had known about the military and what I thought I would be leading in the Army as a leader drastically changed overnight. And we were thrust into war. And what we thought was going to be war or something very short ended up becoming 20 years. So I spent my entire career at war. That's all I've known. So my marriage was also in war. And what I mean by that is that I spent a life and love where we were in this cycle of we were home, but when we were home, we weren't home. We were at the field. We were gearing up to getting ready to go to war, or then we were away at war, and then that cycle repeat itself. Because, like I said, I spent 3 combat tours to Iraq. I had 39 total months, and my ex-husband had 2 tours to Iraq. And in between those times, you're constantly in the field, you're exercising. We had joint readiness rotations, and so how much quality time did you have as a husband and wife that normal husband and wives have when you think about it, a standard 9 to 5 job, you come home and your weekends, we didn't have that. And so I think, it's this constant honeymoon period of like, oh my gosh, I get to see you and we get to spend time. And then all of a sudden you're thrust away. And then, you know, um, so I think a lot of times you don't spend the time necessary when there's issues, right?
Yeah.
And not to say that we had issues. I don't think we did. I just think that we didn't get to necessarily dig really deep. And that's what I mean by the death by 1,000 paper cuts. And I think we did communicate. I just don't think we probably communicated as well as we should have. And so when you have 2 decades worth of combat experience and you're constantly in and out and you've got trauma, right? And now you're both retiring and you just got a lot of things that you have to unpack. You come to this junction in your life and you're hit with it all of a sudden. You're left with this unexpected, oh my gosh, right? And in that, our love story just didn't survive, right? And and that was something really hard to kind of work through, right? When all you can think about and all you're dreaming about is this of this is what our house is going to look like. This is what we're looking at. These are our dreams. We're going to travel. We're going to do this. And all of a sudden, it just comes to a grinding halt. And everything that you ever thought about is not going to happen anymore. And oh, by the way, now you have to tell to your kids all the dreams that that they heard mommy and daddy planning aren't going to happen. And now they're splitting their time between 2 households and trying to explain to your kids that mom and dad aren't together anymore, right? And looking at the pain and the disappointment at them. Like that was probably harder than just myself going through the love loss. And I think another part of my growth was really just being an army officer, right? The resilience that I learned in the military. You just unfortunately, I don't know how to better to describe than you just learn to buckle down and realize that you have to do the work. You have to do the inner work. You have
Yeah.
to look at yourself in the mirror and say, I am part of the problem, or that I am the problem, right? Um, a relationship is two people. It takes two people. It takes two people to dance. And a huge part of it is you, right? You can blame the other person all you want, but you have to blame yourself too,
Yes.
right? And
Yes.
so I had to take a good look at myself and say, okay, well, maybe he didn't want to be in this marriage anymore. But what did I do to contribute to why he didn't want to be part of this marriage? And what am I going to do to ensure that if I ever get the opportunity to be in another relationship, that I'm not going to bring forward into the next one? Right. And that's hard. That's really, really hard to look at yourself in the mirror and to tell yourself honestly what you suck at and
Yeah.
what you did that was wrong and what you are, you know, doing wrong and what you've got to fix, right? And not blame somebody else and take an active measure of I'm not going to do that again and work at that all the time, right? And not constantly go back and say, well, that's not me, it's that other person.
Yep. And because you're the only one. Yeah, it's interesting because I did a similar self-analysis. It's weird how much your story correlates to my accident and the recovery from that. And I wonder if that's part of why your process resonated so deeply with me, when we were in class together. Um, for me, the comeback started when I quit trying to get back to who I was before the accident. And I accepted the fact, I had to accept the fact that I'll never go back to that person. I can't. It doesn't exist anymore. My body will never be the same. My brain will no longer function the same. It just isn't an option for me. And I can mourn that for every day that's left in my life. Or I can say, okay, cool. Let's take stock of where I am right now. Let's look at the things that I can change and focus on those things to make them better. I had to learn how to walk again, and I walked for a while with a cane, and that was really embarrassing. There's nothing weirder than being a mom with toddlers hobbling after them with a cane. But I was like, okay, this is something I can do. My balance till today is jacked up. But it was really embarrassing because I fall at random moments. My equilibrium is permanently impacted, and I will, like, just walking down the street, fall. And it's like, it's not that I tripped on a crack. It's not that my shoe rolled or whatever. It's that my balance goes. I remember I was working out with a friend, and he was spotting me while I was squatting. And in the depths of the squat, I suddenly lost my balance and fell. And thank God he was strong enough to catch the bar and lift it back up again. And and it was mortifying because I had to then get into, like, yes, my balance goes at random moments. I never know what's going to impact it. But I had to first come to terms with this is what I've got to work with. This is what I can control. This is the reality of this situation. And this is where I need to get myself to, or this is where I want to be. This is the future ahead. And as you said, like, it's humbling. It's really hard to do, because to be really honest with yourself and to look yourself in the mirror and be like, damn, this is it. These are my flaws. Personality wise, I had a lot that I personally had to address, but also to shift your focus. It's hard to shift your focus out of the, man, this really sucks and I hate it here. And instead shift it to, you know what? I can't focus on this, or I'm going to get more of this. I need to force myself on a daily basis, get up out of bed and focus on this thing that I'm going to do better today.
Yeah.
And um, it's a hard process. And in the moment, it feels exhausting and impossible. But if you can force yourself just on blind faith to take that step forward, it's amazing what you can accomplish. I watch your presentation, like you are super, super active in the veterans community. You are so open and honest about the path that you've taken to get there. And I know for a fact that you make a huge impact on people who are going through a similar struggle, but aren't yet ready to be as open about it as you are.
Well,
And that's amazing.
it's interesting that you said you can't be the person that you used to be. Um, and I think that the when you are the person that's going through that, you recognize that. I think the hard part is the people around you don't recognize that. They
Yes.
want you to be the person that you once were.
Yeah.
In fact, they want you to be that person so bad that they come alongside you and they're willing to support you to help heal you, but they want you to help and heal you in a rush to get you back to who you once were. And when you aren't going back in that direction, they get so frustrated with you and angry with you. And oftentimes it's the ones closest to you, right?
Yes.
Your
Yes.
loved ones. I'm talking about your family oftentimes. And they don't get that your journey means that your growth has to be a newer version of you.
Yes.
And it's written in different ways. The version that I like to reference is the storm. And it says that, they whispered to her that she is the storm, right? And for me, when I look at that, when I think about that, I think about my journey and I think about where I was, where I am, where I need to go. And I realize that life is nothing but a storm. It's a chaotic mess, right?
Yes.
And it's a journey. And so I reference that I am the storm. And you've got to live life where you've got to punch through the storm, right? I think other people have said this, right? You've got to live through it, you got to walk through it. You can't not talk about it or go through it. You can't be the ostrich who sticks their head in the sand, right? And the hardest part is getting your loved ones, your family and friends to understand that you will never be that version of yourself again.
Yeah.
Because and metaphorically, it's like Humpty Dumpty, right? Humpty Dumpty had a great fall. Humpty Dumpty, fell and broke in a bunch of pieces. And you could try all your best and get the best, 100-mile-an-hour tape, as the army likes to say, and the best glue and stick it all back together. But I guarantee you're not going to find all the pieces. And you're not going to stick it back in all the great places. Those shards are going to be there and you're not going to look exactly the same or feel the same. So you can't be that same version. And there's growth in that.
Yes.
And it's hard. It's really hard when you're growing in a certain version of yourself and your loved ones want you to be a different version, which is your older version. I think that was probably a sticking point for me. And that was really tough. It was really tough.
Absolutely. And I don't think I realized until much later what was happening. As I mentioned earlier, I lost my two closest girlfriends that I thought we were going to be in the old folks' home, chasing the orderlies and our walkers, like I thought I thought we were going to be friends forever. And I also lost the relationship with my mother, and it was hard. And I kept thinking, okay, what's wrong with me that these people that I love so much don't fit in my life any longer? And eventually I had to be like, oh, you know what it is? It's the version of me that they fit in with no longer exists. And they're choosing not to grow with me to be this better, more real version of myself. They need the very sanitized, um very basic version of me. And when I start to become the true me who is rough around the edges and who is raw and open and it is a lot more open about the things I've come through than I ever used to be. And that wasn't convenient for them any longer. And that's okay. It is what it is. This version of me doesn't fit them any longer. And I love the point that you make. And I know that I hear people talk about how lonely growth is, but I think it kind of has to be. It's hard to grow in a room full of people.
Yeah. I will say it's really, really hard. Um, Especially for me, right? In our culture, in the Asian culture, where we're very family oriented,
Mm,
especially for me being the oldest, right? It's very family oriented. You do what your family says, you put your family and duty honor first,
mm.
right? Everything's about family. And I struggle with sometimes having boundaries of
Oh,
saying no and not doing things because I have been, taught my whole life to always do what the family says, place the family first. Even when I personally am like, no, no, I don't want to. I just don't want to.
that is hard.
It is hard. And then the guilt gnaws at me when I'm like, why did I don't want,
Yes.
right?
Yeah. Oh, I know that from.
I battle that constantly. No, I really don't want to because I don't for whatever reason. But then now the guilt set in because I said no, right?
Yep.
But even though I know the healthy boundary is for me to say no.
Yeah.
And so it's this constant like, oh my gosh, this, proverbial dog chasing its tail. And so I will say that it was a learning curve for both of us, my family and me when I had to, grow through my journey of being this newer version of myself. And, it took time. Um, there are times that, I think sometimes there's a slip on both sides, but I think overall, there has been some adjustments, but it took a while. And it was definitely not easy. It was painful. And for me, I think the biggest reason why I have been open and honest was part of it was, I'm not going to lie, it was for my own benefit. It was it was healing for me to share.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
by doing so, it allowed me to release
Yes.
my own pain.
Yeah.
I for me, I release anger, frustration, and pain by talking. I'm a talker, right? And so, but when I'm talking, I'm also analyzing at the same time. And oftentimes I say the same thing 100 times. So a lot of people are like, "Oh my God, Olivia, you're a freaking broken record." I'm like, sometimes I'm not necessarily talking to you. I'm kind of talking to myself. But it's because I'm analyzing the problem 100 different ways because I'm reanalyzing it in my mind 100 different times from 100 different angles. And I'm like, oh, so if I came in at this way, but this person said it this way, but if it, it's like I'm constantly looking at it, reanalyzing, redoing it, like reliving situations in my head to see if I did it this way, if I moved this variable this way, could I've done it different? Could I have done better? And I think again, that's the whole army planning in my head all over again. And so for me, it's that by talking it through, it allows me to release, almost as if it was pressure, right? It's like a cooker pressure, like releasing that pent up frustration. And I recognize that if I do this, there might be somebody who would resonate
Yes.
with my story.
Yes.
And if you resonate with that story, maybe it will help you go through what I went through. Because I felt like when I was going through what I was going through, I didn't have somebody that I resonated with. especially in my field in the military, which is very male dominated. Most of the stories that I saw, while there were parts of their stories that I resonated with, are predominantly male,
Yeah.
right? You know, the whole going to war and seeing losing our buddies and suicide. 100%. I resonate with all of that, and I feel it and I see those stories in my mind because I've been there. But again, they're all male versions of those stories. Where are the female versions of those stories? I know that they're out there. I just might have not heard them yet. Um, and then at the same time, it's I know I'm not the only one. And and so and it's a different lens, right? Being a woman, being Asian, you know, somebody who was dual military. You know, I had children later in my life. It's just a different perspective. And so that's just what I thought of, you know, maybe my story can help somebody. And then at the same time, I recognized here I was at the pinnacle of my career, and I'm supposed to have all the answers, and I'm supposed to have all the resources, and I was miserably failing. And that was a light bulb moment for me that I'm supposed to have all the answers and all the success, and I'm failing. And the majority of the military isn't where I sit. They sit at a lower echelon. So if I'm failing, where are they? And to me, that was unacceptable as an answer. And so that's where my advocacy really came about when I decided I feel like I need to do something. And that's really where my calling is. And that's really where telling of my story is, and why I do what I do, and why I say my heart is with the military community.
I love that. And it's amazing how freeing it is to talk about the things that are taboo to talk about. You know, I grew up in abuse and neglect and, you know, constantly being told you cannot talk about these things. If you talk about these things, people are going to know how bad of a kid you are because you're being abused because it's your fault, number one. But number two, if your father gets in trouble, that's going to be on your shoulders as well. And you're going to end up in a worse situation than you're in. And so it wasn't until after my accident when I lost the ability to maintain a facade. You know, when your brain is on fire and your body doesn't work any longer and life feels just overwhelming on a daily basis, maintaining a facade isn't something that you can do any longer. And it was crazy because I started sharing out of a point of just desperation to be heard by anyone. And the more it was funny, that was what originally took me to social media was I was like, I'm going to be alone forever. I am unlovable. I have this broken body. My brain no longer works correctly. Like everything about me is broken. And I'm going to start journaling. Like to me, that's what Instagram was it was an online journal. Number one, to make sure I didn't lose my memories because in my accident, it did mess with my memory somewhat. But also number two, I started getting responses back from people that they had similar experiences that they didn't even realize that they had similar, like, you know, looking at me, they wouldn't think that we had a similar path, but that we had similar experiences, and it empowered them when I openly owned my story. And so you being willing to just stand there in your truth and be open and honest, you'll never know how many people that resonates with, that it empowers in small ways and in big ways. And they need to hear that whether you ever realize it or not. And so like I know I said it before, but it's amazing that you had the strength and the willingness to put yourself out like that. Out there like that, not out like that. Out there like that.
Yeah, no, you know, I think the other part is I've always been a storyteller. Um, a huge part of it is I've been telling stories in my head my whole life. A huge part of it was create stories in my head. It was a means for me growing up to escape.
Yes.
Um, so for your listeners and for your viewers, so I'm biracial. I'm three-quarters Korean and a quarter English. And so I grew up, I'm 45, so I grew up in the 80s, right? And in the 80s it was all about assimilation, act white, be white, do white. And I distinctly remember like second or third grade, um, my teacher telling, it was actually second grade, my teacher telling my parents, your child's vocabulary stinks. So whatever language you're speaking at home, you need to stop because this is America. We're American. We speak English. And she's behind in her vocabulary.
Oh, wow.
And the interesting part was Korean was spoken at the home, and I did speak Korean. And I did know a little bit of German because when my dad was in the army, and he was actually still in the army at that point. When I was 4 years old, my dad was stationed in Germany and I lived in Germany and I went to a German kindergarten. So I actually knew German and I spoke German fluently too. So I knew Korean, English, and German. So I had a jumble of languages. In fact, my parents said whenever I got angry, I would speak all three languages in one sentence. That would be amazing if I could do that right now. But and so again, this is the 80s. Act white, be white, do white. So my family, my parents, assimilation was the key. So they're like, so their frustration and their concern was Living needs to sound and be and do white as possible. So Korean was spoken in and around and to me, but I was forbidden to speak Korean back. So I understand context a lot. So I could watch Korean drama all the time. I could listen to K-pop, right? I can listen to my grandmother speak to me, and I understand by context what is being told to me, but I cannot speak it back. Like I go to a restaurant and order like very simple, right? But I really don't speak Korean. A huge problem with it is one, I feel uncomfortable. Two, I've been picked on even by Koreans because they're like, you have an accent and you sound horrible and your enunciations are horrible. So not only was I picked on by the Americans in my class, I also got picked on by Koreans because the Koreans were like, you're not purebred. You're not Korean enough. You don't look Korean. Because even Koreans will look at me and say, you're Korean? You don't look Korean. Because they'll say something and I'll respond back in Korean. They're like, what? Like, yeah, I'm Korean. They're like, how are you Korean? Right? It's like how are you Korean? It's like, because my mother's Korean. They're like, oh, you know. And they're like, really? And I'm like, yeah, and so is my dad. They're like, oh, wait a minute. But you look kind of weird. I'm like, okay, because my dad's half Korean. They're like, oh, okay. So then they're like, okay, that's why you kind of look a little weird, right? So they don't even identify with me, right? They don't. So it's funny, right? To everybody else, they're like, oh, you're definitely Asian. But the Asian people look at me and they're like, you don't look Asian to me. And so it's interesting, in this whole thing about just about being accepted. And so I don't know, for me it's just culture and just acceptance and being able to share that. And I don't know, for that piece for me it's just in that cultural piece alone, if people can resonate, I think is important, and just being able to share that piece. Um,
Well,
you know,
and learning how to accept people for who they are and however they show up. It's I similarly, and I'm not sure why, but I've never really felt like I fit in. And, and it's interesting because when I talk about this, people are always like, you fit in everywhere. And I'm like, I don't know that I ever feel like I fit in anywhere. I've learned how to be comfortable in my own skin. And so I fit in with me, and I've stopped trying to force any other interaction. It used to be like when I would enter a room, I would analyze it. I would try to figure out, okay, what are the dynamics? Where's the power? How do I fit in? And I no longer do that. But I also no longer, I've never felt like I really fit in anywhere. And I was never certain if it was because, my background, there was so much trauma, if it was because I grew up in the deep South and then moved north. And so you'll hear it come out sometimes, but I have that deep South, accent. I have that Alabama accent. Or if the whole idea of fitting in is a fallacy, like I'm not sure anybody ever feels like they fit in.
I think I think it is the human nature to want to belong and to fit in. And I
Yeah,
think we're all naturally going to gravitate to wanting to fit in any environment. Because it makes us feel comfortable. And I think
definitely.
what I learned in the military is that you learn to adjust into any environment.
Yes.
And for me, I what I walked away with is if I can survive in a male dominated environment, which is the military, and then oh by the way, I was in the most male dominated segment of the military, which was combat arms, and I led in that segment. Um, I think I'm going to be fine. And the funny part is my sister and her friends say this, and my current partner, we've been together for 2.5 years. He's retired also from the Army, 26 years, special operations, right? And and so if you know anything about the military, special operations is a league on their own. And and it's funny, I always get this comment. They're like, Olivia, you're scary. And I'm like, how am I scary? I'm like 5'1". I weigh 118 pounds. What are you talking about? I'm scary. I'm just like little old me. And they're like, no, you're scary. You have this presence, this aura. You're like scary. Like, don't mess with her. like me? Nah. And so I think it's just hilarious to me. So I just kind of take that. I'm like, well, if you think I'm scary, cool.
But
I
I
don't
mean,
even
even that is a certain level of comfort in your own skin, because like I've heard similarly for a long time that I'm intimidating. And I feel like what about me would possibly be intimidating? Because in my mind, I'm always like, man, I am a hot mess, and like I'm always winging it. Like in my mind, I always feel like perpetual case of imposter syndrome. Perpetual. I
Yeah.
always feel like at some point in time, somebody's gonna be like, yeah, she has no idea what she's doing, whether it's parenting, whether it's podcasting, whether it's any of the things I've ever done, and I've had the luck to be involved in some really incredible things. And it always feels like I'm the one in the room who has no idea what I'm doing. But I think that what people read off of you is a comfort in your own skin and an unabashed ownership of your space. And that's huge because it takes a certain level of it's not resilience, and I'm not sure what the word is I'm looking for, but it takes a certain level of gumption. I mean, because it's not grit, it's not, like all the words that are coming to mind aren't it, but it takes like a certain level of like just fuck it. This is who I am. I own my space, and you can take it or leave it. Either way, I'm still going to do me.
I think a huge part of it was, going back to this whole biracial identity of myself, um, the wanting to belong. I was in college and I grew up in Washington State, so on the West Coast. And I went to college on the East Coast in Virginia, and I went to Southwest Virginia. So that's, if you don't know, that's very twangy, and it was in the middle of nowhere. And mind you, I went to college in 1996. So dial up was just happening on the internet. And the internet was just being created in terms of like www dot whatever was just being created, right? So this is the .com boom. And so I went to Radford University, and I had no idea, one, where Radford was, what Radford University was in 96, but I just knew that this college was on the opposite coast of my parents. And I wanted to go far away from my parents, right? 'Cause that's what I wanted. I wanted, because I was that kid. I was that kid that was like, I'm going to be that one that's gonna like go and flee the nest. You know, my dad always said this. I'm daddy's girl, by the way, and I didn't get along with my mom growing up. I have a great relationship with her now, but as a child, no, we did not. So my dad always said that she was born with wings, and could she have flown, flown off the nest the day she was born, she would have, right? So here I am, off to college I go, and Washington's over here, Virginia's over here, and I'm like, yes, that's where I'm going. Mind you, I had no idea what I was getting into. So I show up to school, and I grew up in an all white neighborhood my whole life, right? And I'm thinking college has got to be like what I saw on TV, which was the only thing I'd ever saw on TV was like house parties. So I'm thinking college is going to be a melting pot of like ethnicity and people and experiences. And I thought all colleges were like that. Because again, I'm first generation. And I'm going to be the first one going to college. So there was no one who was showing me, teaching me, explaining to me what colleges were. I didn't know there was such thing as a science-based school, a liberal arts-based school. I didn't know anything about college. I'm just going to college because that's what Asians do. Like they pump, you go to college, you go to college. And that's what I'm doing. And I'm going to be an army officer. At the end of the day, I'm going to college and I'm going to commission the army. That's all I knew. So I'm going to college to Virginia, to Radford University, because I'm going to do ROTC there. When I show up and I'm like, oh my God, it's in the middle of nowhere because what the hell? And I look around and I look at the campus and I look at the people and I'm like, why is my school just like how I grew up? Dominantly white yet again, like 99.99. It's not like the way TV is. Like what, and why is it that I cannot understand a word,
Oh,
anything? Like it was so like it was a whole nother language.
oh, wow.
Like I don't understand the words that are coming out of your mouth. Like I it could have been Greek as far as I was concerned. I could not understand the twang. I thought I experienced racism in my life, but I never experienced racism up to that point until I really realized I didn't experience it until I came to that point. I remember being at the grocery store and this little girl was following me around. And I was like, "Are you lost?" And she's like, "No." I'm like, "Can I help you?" "No." "Mom, what's wrong with her?"
Oh,
"What's wrong with me?" She's like, "Mom, what's wrong with her eyes? Her eyes are really slanted.
oh,
Something's wrong with her." Like, and my eyes actually aren't that slanted. I mean, they are, but they're not, right? And I'm just like, and I've had cops follow me, pull me over just because, right? I'm like, wow, this is really is racist. Interesting. And I just was like really taken aback about this is not what I thought college was going to be, right? That college is supposed to be a melting pot of people. But, and I just, it was in that light, in that first year of college, halfway through my freshman year, that I woke up in the middle of the night and our beds were bunked. And my roommate, her name was Jill, and I was like, and I remember hitting the bunk. I was like, Jill, what? She's like, go to bed, Olivia. I was like, no. I was like, I am 3/4 Korean, and a quarter white. I didn't know at that time that my white side was English. My dad did a 23andMe a few years ago. She's like, great, Olivia, I already know this. I was like, no, no, no. You don't understand. I am 3/4 Korean and a quarter white. She's like, yeah, great, Olivia. Take your ass to bed. I'm like, no, you don't understand. This is my makeup. I can't wash it off. This is who I am. And if you cannot accept me for who I am, then
wow.
fuck you and we cannot be friends. This is who I am. I cannot change this. And if you cannot accept that this is my DNA, then you and I are not worthy to be friends. And she's like, great, Olivia. Good thing you know that about yourself. Can you go to bed now? I was like, okay. And I think it was just like this epiphany that I had that there's no amount of scrubbing of my face that will ever change the DNA makeup of who I am. And either you're going to accept the fact that this is who I am or you're not.
Yeah,
And either we're going to be friends and we're going to accept those differences and learn to get over that, or we're not.
yeah.
I mean, there was still obviously some growth through that, But it was having that epiphany at 18 years old at college and realizing that this is who I am. And I had to learn for myself that I will never be enough. And I had to be okay with that. I had to be enough for myself.
It's interesting. I know we're getting at the end of the hour and I don't know what your schedule looks like, but that awareness of being enough is such a powerful one. Um, for me, it didn't come until after my accident. And I want to say, I don't even know what made it click for me, but I had always in my mind subconsciously thought, if I am successful enough, if I am wealthy enough, if I do my makeup well enough, if I'm thin enough, if I'm any of these things, then eventually my parents will love me. And for me, and it was funny because for a while there, I would do the mantra, I am enough, because what I realized was that I will always be enough. I was always enough. I'm never going to fit into whatever it is they expect of me, and that's okay. The me that I am, as I stand into my space today, is enough and is worthy enough. And if people can't accept that, that's a them issue. It has nothing to do with me, because each and every one of us is unique and each and every one of us is enough. And we are worthy just as we are. You know, as long as we're doing our best every day to learn and grow and be the best versions of ourselves, we are enough. And it's not going to resonate with everybody. And it's not going to be accepted by everybody. And that's okay. We're not made for them. The people for whom we are not enough just as we are, it doesn't matter what we did, we would never be enough, because what they need is something that doesn't exist in this person. And that's okay. And so it's kind of amazing that you had that realization in your 20s. I wish I'd had it a lot earlier, because I made myself small for so many relationships, trying to be enough for relationships that didn't serve me anyway.
It's interesting that you say that. So I think, I came to the realization about me ethnically that I was enough, but I didn't come to the realization that I was enough in other ways, right? I think I made myself smaller in other ways in terms of my worthiness as a leader, as a woman, as in other differences, right? Um, and so those are the things that, I look through in that lens of growing through my trauma and going through, a divorce and looking back and saying, those are the compromises that I will not do again. So if I had the chance to have another relationship and have the opportunity to maybe one day be loved again and go through, the chance to be married again, these are the places that I will not compromise, right? But again, I have to go look at myself and say, what was a part of that relationship that I contributed that I didn't do well in, right? Because a common denominator in a relationship is you. So if you want the next relationship to succeed, you have to be totally honest with yourself and say, where did you suck at, right? Me. Where did I suck at? And where am I not going to point the finger and say, I have to be the better person?
Yes.
If I am the better person, and if I truly have fixed the parts that were jacked up, and so therefore I could go forward in that relationship, then I know that, I have a better chance of succeeding at that next relationship. But I
Yeah.
also know that I'm going to, put some boundaries and say, these are the places that I am going to not accept, or that I'm going to want to do better or ask to do better, or that I'm not going to compromise in. And it's not to place blame in my past marriage, but there's just things that I recognize that I truly now know about myself. I think that I always knew about that before, but now I know that it's really important to me, right? What do I mean by that? I've always loved to travel, wanted to travel. For part of it was we were in the military, constantly gone. Some of it was funding. And uh, not to say he didn't like to travel, he did. But when I say travel, I really, really want to see the world. There's a lot of places of the world that I want to see. There's a lot of places of the world he didn't want to see. He was like, "Yeah, I'll travel, but only like in these certain places." But I'm like, "Yeah, but I want to go here, here." And he's like, "Nah, nah, nah, nah," right? I'm like, "Okay." But to me, I'm like, I want to see the world. Like, I want to fill up my passport and literally see the world. And and I think this is going back to the part of, making yourself be small, right? Where you look back, you're like, okay, well, I guess it's not that important. I guess I can just
Yeah.
compromise and just I could be happy with just seeing half the world.
Yeah.
And maybe, and I'm not saying question everything about your relationship. I hope that your listeners don't say that or look at what I'm saying as to do that. I'm just saying, like, for me, I recognize that traveling and seeing the world has always been something fundamentally something I've wanted to do as a child. Again, it goes back to what I said earlier. My dad said if I was born with wings, I could have left the house and I would have, right? I've always dreamed, story told in my head ever since I was a child as a way to escape that I wanted to see the world. It's been a passion and a dream of mine. But I've curbed that enthusiasm and that wish for certain things for certain reasons to placate, to make happy, to make things work. And now I realize I'm not going to do that. So I need to find a partner who's willing and okay with when I say I want to travel the world and I want to see all parts of the world, are you down with that? Because if you're not, we may not be a good fit. And that's what I mean by that. That's just one example. And so that was something that I had to learn through. But at the same time, what are the parts that I had to learn and to accept that I was not good at as a partner that I had to really fix about myself?
But it's huge that you have done that work and taken that step and seen that, that you saw the fact that, like, this is an opportunity for growth. This isn't a punishment. This isn't a failure. This is an opportunity for growth. And I'm going to take that opportunity for growth because getting from here to here, this is where I want to be. And if I sit here in my comfort zone and I stay small and I settle for this, that's a choice. And that's perfectly acceptable. But if where I really want to be is here, I've got to be willing to do the work and step outside my comfort zone and be uncomfortable to get to this place. And it takes a lot of guts and a lot of courage because it is scary, to push yourself outside your comfort zone like that takes being willing to be comfortable in being uncomfortable.
I think for me, I guess the way I look at it, my perspective is the following. I had the honor of being able to wear our nation's cloth, and I served this nation for 20 years. But it's not just serving. I had the humbling experience and the honor of leading some of the very best sons and daughters, right? And this is what I mean by that. So, like I said, I was an officer in the United States Army, and there were certain positions that I had within the United States Army where I led and commanded within those positions in the United States Army. I was a company commander. So I was a platoon leader at one point. I was a company commander. Other times I was staff officers or small group leaders. But in those key positions where I led, I had command authority, right?
Mm.
And some of those decisions meant that if I didn't do the right thing, it could drastically affect
Wow.
their outcome.
Wow.
And I
Yeah.
took it seriously,
Yeah.
especially because we spent 20 years at war. And for me, I'm like, man, I don't want to mess this up.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so when I look at that and I look at what I got to do for 20 years, and then you take that back and you come home, you're like, I think everything else in hindsight is kind of easy, right? It's
Yeah.
kind of easy. And so if you can survive war,
Yeah.
I think the rest is kind of easy, right? And I think from a woman's perspective, right, as a mom who's had 2 kids, right? If you could bear through childbirth twice, gone to combat 3 times, I think the rest is kind of easy. It's kind of my perspective through it.
Well, and if you let life be, almost anything can be easy if you trust the process and focus on the reality is I think a lot of people look at success and they think it's linear. They think you start here and you end here and it's linear. The reality is that success is made of high points and low points. And if you focus on the low points, it's going to feel hard. If you focus on the high points, then it's going to make the low points feel really, really ugly. But if you focus on the end goal and accept the fact that those are both parts of the process and keep your vision on that end goal, it ends up becoming a lot easier because you're going to have both the highs and the lows. And ultimately, they both help move you. It's like a wave. Every wave is going to move you a little bit closer to that end goal as long as you stick with the process.
Yeah.
But if you're like, nope, I'm going to make it, and the first time that you have a low, it's going to distract you if you lose sight of where you're going. And so that's awesome. I love that.
Yeah, and I think for me, it's one of the reasons why how I, you know, unexpectedly got into pageantry, right?
Yeah.
A friend of mine was like, "Hey, Olivia, I think you should do a pageant. I'm a pageant director and a local state pageant director, and I think you should do it." And I was like, "Nope." This is exactly how the conversation went. Nope. Like, I think you totally should. You would be great for it. Like, nope. I think you should. It would be awesome. It's got this, this, and this. I'm like, nope. She's like, I think you should. I was like, okay, what's in it? So she explained it to me, and I was like, it's got this, we got a gown and, blah, 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 blah. And I was like, mm. So in my head, I was like, well, I like gowns. I totally do the interview part because I'm public relations, public affairs. Like I talk. Okay, no problem. And let's see what else. I was like, is there a talent part? Because I don't want to do talent. She's like, nope. I was like, okay, cool. And she's like, and there's a swimsuit part. And I was like, ew, I don't know about that part. I was like, well, I mean, I have lost a lot of weight because I did lose, I was heavier in the military, right? And part of my journey, I think what we didn't capture was part of my journey of exiting the military until now, I lost 25 pounds, right? And a huge part of it was drastically overnight. I lost like 15 pounds in 2 weeks coming through my divorce, almost committing suicide. It was just a traumatic experience. Um, but so in my head, I was like, what? I've lost a lot of weight, look better. Okay. So I'm like, how hard is it to wear a swimsuit? And then this kind of goes back to what I just said, right? I'm like, well, I mean, I've survived war 3 times, almost committed suicide. Yeah, well, I've done all these hard things. So is it really that hard to walk on stage with a swimsuit? I guess not. So, okay, fine. Sure, I'll try it. So I was like, you know what? I'll just try it just to check the block and say that I've done it. What else can I do? And what could I lose from this? And so I really didn't think I was going to stick to it. It was just like, whatever, I'm just going to try it. And here we are, that was November of 2020, right?
Yeah.
And where are we now, right? In 2024, and I'm still in pageantry. So, and what I've learned through it is that pageantry has given me a newfound respect when it comes to confidence in a totally different way. Did I have confidence before? 100%, yes. But it's a different set of confidence. It's owning the stage in a way that I've, owned the stage previously. I'm a motivational speaker, I've been in front of troops, all that kind of stuff, but it's a different kind of way of owning the stage, especially when you're out there, strutting your stuff in a swimsuit or a gown and you're the only one. And it's, very subjective. And then at the same time, working on a goal that isn't, operational or military, right? Um, and then, I worked really hard, physically. I have a personal trainer, and just putting my body through physical fitness in a way that I never thought that I could, right? My trainer, his name is Craig. It's Body by Craig. I made the comment. He's like, "Yeah, we're gonna work on your body. What do you want to work on?" And I was like, I want to get toned. I want to look good. Be confident on stage. And he's like, "Well, what parts of your body is the hardest to work?" I was like, my abs." I was like, "Cause I never have them. I'm apple shaped. I carry all my weight in my gut." And he's like, "Okay, yeah, we'll get you a six pack." I was like, that ain't gonna happen. Never had one." And he's like, "Yeah, and we'll work on your booty." I was like, that ain't gonna happen either. I am Korean. Like, that just this just doesn't work." And he's just like, "Oh, I just heard a challenge." He's like, "We're gonna get you abs and we're gonna get you a booty." And I'm like, "Yeah, okay. It's not gonna happen." Yeah, I kinda ate those words. So, but it's just but and that is what I learned through all of this, going through competition, is that you can do something that you really want, learn through the correct system, putting your mind through it, and learning the tools and the competence. And the other part that I really learned about pageantry wasn't for necessarily myself, but the amount of messages that I got from other women. Because here I am, I'm in my mid 40s, right? I'm, in my mid 40s, I'm a mom. And when you think of pageantry, you think of women that are in their 20s, right? 20-year-old women who aren't married, who's never had kids, who are, pretty and tall and, perfect bodies. You don't think of short 5'1" women who've had kids, who've been married and divorced. And, I am not what you think as a pageant body shaped woman. And so amount of messages that I've gotten from women, especially those that are in the military, they're like, "Olivia, one, thanks for having the courage to do what you do, and two, for giving us the idea that this is something that we can do, that you're changing the stereotype that we are beautiful, that we are capable, that we can do it, and that um this is something attainable for us." And I'm like, "Oh, cool."
Awesome. That is awesome.
And I get to wear a gown. I'm all about wearing a gown. Anytime that I can wear a gown, right? I think that's the other part, because I wore a combat uniform for 20 years. I'm like, anytime that I can put on a gown, I'm all for it.
Oh, I love that. I love that. Well, my dear, I think that's like the perfect stopping point, and I love how you ended it on the like such a unique way to help empower women. Because I don't know that I ever realized that side of pageantry, but that is such a great way to show women that you can do hard things, you can do whatever you want to be, and the only thing that's stopping you is that inner monologue that says I'm not enough. And so that's awesome.
100%. I
So
think
if
we're our own
people
worst critic.
what?
We are our own worst critic, to be honest.
So true. I love that. So if people want to find out more about you, where would they find you?
So I am all over on Instagram. I'm the underscore Olivia Nunn. I'm also on LinkedIn. You can find me Olivia Nunn. And I have my own website, olivianunn.com. And I'm also on Facebook.
Well, thank you, girl. I appreciate this. You are badass.
Well, thank
And I am honored to know such a badass.